Okay, so we're being asked to factorize this expression here, and the first thing that we should always check when we're doing any form of factorizing problem is to see if there are any common factors to all of the terms. But we quickly discover with this that there is nothing common between all three of these terms. So 7 isn't a factor of either the first or the last term. 12 has factors 2, 3, 4, things like that, but that isn't shared by the first or the middle term. And there's only an x in the first and the second term. There isn't an x in the third term. So we haven't got any common factors, so we can't do what we looked at in the previous video. However, what we do see is that this is a quadratic expression. It has that x squared at the start here. And we know from previous work on multiplying out brackets and multiplying out double brackets in particular, that we can write quadratic expressions in a bracketed form. So having two brackets like this. And in this form previously what we've done is we've taken whatever expressions have been on the inside of the two brackets and we've multiplied them together, and that's got us to this quadratic form that we've had here. So to go in the other direction, to go from the expanded form, this x squared plus 7x plus 12, and put it back into the brackets, we actually need to think about that original process we would have done, that multiplying out process. Because thinking about what would have happened when we multiplied out a pair of brackets will allow us to see what needs to go back into those brackets to make that whole process work in the first place. So what I mean by that is, as we work through this, we're going to see a bunch of different clues for what goes in these brackets. To start off nice and simply, we look at this x squared that we've got here. There's only one way that we could have made that x squared from multiplying out those two brackets, and that's by having an x in the front of each of them. Then if we think about that, I'm going to work in reverse down here as well, just as a separate point, just to see what we're doing. What I mean by that is if we've got the x in the front of each of those brackets, then when we multiply out, we'd multiply this x by that x, and that would give us, as a starting point, x squared. So that's the beginning of what these two brackets are going to look like. The next clue comes from this plus 12 that we have here, because the only way we're going to make that number is by having a number in the end of each of our brackets. Then when those two numbers multiply together, they will give us the 12. So they need to be numbers that make 12, i.e. they need to be factors of 12. So over here, if we just jot that down, our factors of 12 are 1 and 12 multiplied together, 2 and 6 will do it, and 3 and 4 will do it as well. So one of these pairs of numbers is going to need to go in the end of each of those brackets to multiply to make 12. So that's another clue done, and this does break down into clues. So we've done the x squared clue, that was lovely. We've got this plus, this 12 clue here, those two numbers multiplied together, and I hesitated on the plus there because this in and of itself is actually a separate clue. That plus sign, remember we're multiplying two numbers together to make this 12, and the only way we can multiply two numbers together to make a positive number is if both the original numbers were positive or both the original numbers were negative. So they have the same sign. So that means that tells us that in this pair of brackets we've got to have either a plus and a plus, or we've got to have a minus and a minus. And the way we determine which one of those it's going to be is by looking at the other sign, the sign in front of the x term. That's positive, which tells us that at least one of these signs is going to have to be positive. And as they both have to be the same thing, then both of our signs need to be positive. So that's another clue sorted out. Our final clue then comes from the 7x itself, because the way we're going to get that 7x is by having a number in here that will multiply by that x, and another number in the far bracket that will multiply by the first x, and then we're going to end up adding those two numbers together because we've got these two pluses. So the numbers here need to add to make that 7 that we've got up at the top, and they also need to multiply to make 12. And so we can see that the only pair of numbers that will do that are going to be the 3 and the 4. And that's our answer. Going back to what I was doing down here, we can check that this works, or we can see that it works by putting this in now. So if we'd been working in the other direction, if we'd started with this pair of brackets here, we would have done the x multiplied by the x would have given us x squared. We then would have done x multiplied by 4 would have given us plus 4x. Then we would have done 3 multiplied by x, which would have given us plus 3x. And finally, we would have done 3 multiplied by 4, which would have given us the plus 12. And all we can see there, just to finish that off, is if we collect our terms, then the plus 4x and the plus 3x gives us the plus 7x that we had originally. So that's factorising a quadratic. And the whole idea is just think, well, if I had that pair of brackets and I multiplied them out, would it get me back to, or how would it get me back to that original expression that I had? Let's just look at one more example just to make sure that we're clear on this whole process. So again, looking at this expression, let's start by seeing if there are any common factors that we can take out, and there aren't, but it is a quadratic expression, so we should be able to put it into this pair of double brackets. And so again, we're going to work through and we're going to see what clues we have. So starting with the x squared, the only way we're going to get that, as before, is by having an x in the front of each bracket. So x times x will give us the x squared. That's clue number 1 sorted. Clue number 2 comes from the 16. So we need to have numbers in the end of each of these brackets that multiply together to make 16. So 1 and 16 will do it. 2 and 8 would work. And 4 and 4 would be our final combination. So it's going to be one of those pairs of numbers to go in here. That's all we're going to get out of this 16. So we'll call that clue done. Then let's look at the minus sign in front of the 16. So remember, this 16 is made by multiplying two numbers together. And to multiply two numbers together and get a negative answer, that means we must have had two different signs. So a plus and a minus will multiply to make a minus overall. So I'll pop that in here. It's absolutely fine to stick it in either way around at the moment. This problem is effectively symmetrical. So we've got our plus and minus there. That's that clue sorted out. This plus would have told us that we need at least one of these signs to be a plus. Because we've got one of each, that doesn't actually make any difference. So we'll just call that done. The final bit, however, is this 6. So we need to make that 6. Actually, the fact that it's positive will be important in a moment, but not overly so. It's the 6 that's interesting. And again, we're going to need to use a pair of these numbers. But because we've got a plus and a minus in here now, rather than adding the two numbers to make 6 like we did in the previous example, we need the difference between these two numbers to be equal to 6. Because we're going to add one and then we're going to take away the other. And we can see from that then that 2 and 8 have a difference of 6. So they're going to need to go in here. We just need to ask ourselves which way around it is. Is it plus 8 and minus 2? Or is it plus 2 and minus 8? And for that, we just look back at this positive 6. The only way we're going to get positive 6 is if we add 8 and then we take away 2 from it. And so that will be our answer, this factorized form here. Again, let's just quickly look at that and confirm why this works by working in the other direction. So we've got the x plus 8 multiplied by the x minus 2. And if we expand this out, we'll do x multiplied by x. First of all, will give us x squared. Then we'll do the x multiplied by that minus 2 will give us minus 2x. Then we'll do 8 multiplied by x will give us plus 8x. And then finally we'll do 8 multiplied by minus 2, which will be minus 16. And collecting our like terms, we've got x squared minus 2 plus 8. That gives us our plus 6x. And then minus 16, which is what we were looking for.